A fifth of the world's countries are at war. The lifeblood of war is weapons. This report is about who makes, sells, and trades those weapons. I'm Joe Trento, and for the next hour, we're going to take you inside the arms business. We'll show you who makes, sells, and uses the weapons of war. You'll meet the world's largest arms dealer, and we'll take you to the Persian Gulf War, and we'll show you how the arms business can be a wilderness of conmen, spies, and violence. We call our report Merchants of War. This promotional film is one way the French arms firm, Aerospatiale, sells its Exocet missile. And at $1 million each, they have made plenty of sales. The Exocet has sunk thousands of tons of shipping in the Falklands War and now in the Persian Gulf. And this is Aerospatiale's display at the Navy League Arms Show in Washington, D.C. Aerospatiale is one of a handful of foreign contractors selling at the largely American Arms Convention. It is a show for government and military officials of the United States, but the foreign buyers shop here too. And the prime purpose is to sell and sell more. Sellers use all kinds of methods to get their message across. The Sikorsky division of United Technologies uses a pitchman to push its line of helicopters.
Do you believe in the magic of Sikorsky helicopters?
There's only one answer to that.
That's yes, right.
The main contractor for the space shuttles, Rockwell International, used an elaborate laser beam show to tell its story.
Rockwell has been the U.S. Navy's supplier of submarine navigation equipment since 1958.
McDonnell Douglas used an actor playing the commander of an enemy force, explaining to his troops how McDonnell Douglas equipment caused their defeat.
You will have a tough fight for, as you know, our 18th Armored Battalion and most of our anti-aircraft defenses, artillery, and fuel have been destroyed by the Harriers and Hornets.
Every kind of weapon was represented at the show, and at ever-increasing costs. This is a Sidewinder air-to-air missile, $100,000 each. The F-16, $20 million each. The cruise missile, $850,000. And this reconnaissance drone, $150,000 each. And expensive weapons are not limited to the United States. May Day, 1984, Red Square in Moscow. Every day, hundreds of additional weapons go into the Soviet arsenal. The Soviet war machine is outproducing the United States in conventional weapons 5-1. And the Soviets are pouring weapons into hotspots around the world, from Iraq to Central America. The Soviet Union refused repeated requests to provide a spokesman to talk about their arms sales. And the American buildup moves ahead. It includes the new multi-billion-dollar Trident submarines and their missiles. As the escalation of weapons continues, the Soviets ordered more missile-carrying submarines deployed off the coast of the United States, after the United States added to its arsenal of atomic weapons in Western Europe. Each side has tens of thousands of nuclear warheads atop missiles pointed at each other. The bill for all these weapons on both sides now totals nearly $1 trillion a year. The fear of nuclear Armageddon is sweeping Europe. Mass demonstrations protesting the basing of more nuclear weapons are common. Cambridge University professor and European peace movement leader Gwen Prinz.
The only thing that nuclear weapons can do for you is not related to doctrine at all. It's the fact that their existence may make superpowers more careful than they would otherwise be. That may be so. It's not provable one way or the other.
But not since the U.S. dropped the atomic bombs on Japan in 1945 has anyone died in atomic warfare. Senator John Glenn.
We concentrate on the big boom because that would be the most spectacular, and it's been on TV and it's been It's very catching when you make a story about it on TV, but the piecemeal losing of people in third world nations and others around the world that mounts up to horrendous totals just doesn't get that much attention.
Smithsonian historian and military curator Dr. Edward Ezell.
The best minds have not attacked or paid attention to conventional weapons. And those are the weapons that on a day-to-day basis have killed people over the last 40, 50 years since World War II.
Most of the hot wars that have been fought in the world in the last 40 years have been wars that have been fought in the third world between countries or between groups within countries that are supported by one side or other in the superpower confrontation.
And the current major surrogate war is in Central America. The Soviet Union and its satellite Cuba back the Nicaraguan regime that supports the Marxist rebels in El Salvador and Honduras. The United States backs anti-Sandinista rebels fighting in northern Nicaragua and in southern Nicaragua. And the common denominator is weapons. Not weapons of mass destruction, but plain old-fashioned rifles and artillery. The kind of weapons that have killed 20 million people since World War II. Retired U.S. Naval Admiral Jean LaRocque is a critic of both the U.S. and Soviet Union.
They're the real villains in this piece because they do the basic research, they develop these devastatingly destructive new weapons, and they peddle them around the world.
We have entered the age of war by proxy. Across the map of the world, we face off with the Soviet Union through other nations and revolutionary movements.
There are today some 40 wars going on in the world today. There are only 160 countries in the world, but the United States alone is providing military assistance, weapons to 130 countries of the 160 in the world.
State Department arms official Stanley Sienkiewicz defends U.S. sales.
We do it because we believe it is a highly moral and important political purpose to help defend the survival and security of an Israel, of an England, of a Thailand, of an El Salvador, Honduras, and so on down the line.
U.S. government statistics show the United States sold 39% of all arms to the Third World in 1983. The Soviets had a 17% share, down almost 40% from 1982. But sometimes our weapons policies backfire. The United States sent more weapons to Vietnam than any ally in our history.
We had thoroughly equipped the South Vietnamese Army with American material, and when the Saigon government fell in April of '75, most of that material was still in country. And as a result, it fell into the hands of the North Vietnamese. They'd been showing up in El Salvador, they'd been showing up in Honduras.
And it was Vietnam era.
And it was all Vietnam era material. They could trace it by serial number.
In the past, the only weapons Third World countries could get were the hand-me-downs of the superpowers. Those days are over. When we come back, we'll take you to a Third World arms bazaar and show you some new entrants in the arms race. This is Santiago, Chile, and this is not a celebration of another political victory by Augusto Pinochet's government. It is the opening ceremony of a convention of arms dealers. Val Frechette is an American arms dealer who sells a wide range of unusual weapons. His customers include his host, General Pinochet. He has also supplied weapons to intelligence agencies around the world.
Arms dealers have been around, and arms have been around since the very beginning. Cain killed Abel with the jawbone of an ass. Well, Cain had to buy that jawbone somewhere or pick it up, and it's been like that since the beginning of time.
And we're using high technology in this system in order to make it less dependent on the operator, so it's automatic.
Another interesting product is a very light helmet made of composite material, give very high ballistic resistance.
Many of these people look at these as instruments of survival. Many of these countries, if they didn't produce their arms and equipment that were needed, they wouldn't survive.
And those guys are morally repugnant. To me, they're the dope traders of the world.
As long as there's been an arms trade, there have been critics. Admiral Jean Leroc is a unique one. After retiring from the U.S. Navy, he started the Center for Defense Information in Washington.
But now somehow we've wrapped up patriotism and militarism all in the same phrase. It's patriotic to be militaristic.
It is also profitable, potentially so profitable, that even third world countries have taken their limited resources and devoted them to building an arms business. According to Smithsonian historian and military curator, Dr. Edward Ezell, there are more reasons than profit.
The coming of age of a nation is when it not gets its automobile industry, but when it gets its weapons industry, and when it starts manufacturing its own small caliber weapons or its own aircraft. I think you can see that, for example, in the states that have come into the arms manufacturing business in the last decade. South Africa, Singapore.
Tough men and a challenging task that demands effective weapons.
This is a sales promotion tape produced by the Singapore state-owned arms factory, Chartered Industries, touting a new light machine gun. As Singapore's economic level increased in recent years, the tiny dictatorship wanted to arm itself. So at enormous expense, it went into the arms business.
The Singaporeans now have developed their own rifle and their own machine gun, which they are now trying to sell on the international market.
Don Walsh is the American sales representative for Chartered Industries of Singapore.
What's happening these days is that third world countries that can afford armaments, rather than being clients of either another country or going to a commercial source, create their own arms industry.
Governments control the sales of arms through licensing shipments to other nations. Collectively, they can cut off sales to countries which are politically unacceptable. Chile has been an embargoed country. The large turnout of arms builders at the show is testimony to the ineffectiveness of embargoes. The United Nations voted that no arms were to be sold to Augusto Pinochet's military junta. The United States backed the embargo. And for Chileans who've gone into the arms business, the windfall has been a bonanza. Chile makes all kinds of weapons, from its own jets to cluster bombs.
This is an item that has been recently developed, and it is presently under production. It's a 500-pound cluster bomb, which contains 240 bomblets inside, which is dropped from a plane. I believe that the embargo against Chile has been greatly beneficial to us because, as a country, because it produced the need to provide our own needs, and this is how this particular industry developed.
The lesson to be learned from all this is that placing an arms embargo on a country is perhaps the least effective way to influence its foreign policy or its domestic policy.
South Africa, a rich and highly developed country, was hit hard by the embargo. Embargoed by the United Nations because South Africa has a segregated society for blacks and Asians, the besieged state reacted by launching Arms Corps.
Arms Corps, which is the Armaments Corporation of South Africa, employs roughly about 22,000 people. Our annual armaments production is about $1.6 billion. No highly capital-intensive industry can exist on a relatively small home market only. We have to have this capacity should the emergency arise, but under normal circumstances we must sell some of the capacity in order to justify the capital expense and to maintain our people and the technologies that we've invested into this industry.
Nothing sells arms like a successful war. Some found it ironic that the victorious British showed up at the conference to sell the weapons that won the war against another South American country, Argentina.
You know, it's a strange coincidence, but about a month before the Falklands conflict, we had planned to do a Sea Harrier presentation in the Argentine.
So is that your best possible presentation?
And then we didn't do it, and the Royal Navy took over and did one for us.
Another country taken seriously concerning its products for war is Israel.
We're passing now the Israeli display, and the Israelis, many years ago, were embargoed on arms. And due to various pressures throughout the world, they're forced to develop their own arms trade. And by doing so, they achieved a degree of sophistication whereby now many other countries in the world use Israeli-developed equipment.
This is Simone Leroux-Marc, a French arms dealer who says the Israelis are tough competitors.
Well, I don't know. I think their advantage is that they are the only Western country who has a real proven combat capacity, because they are the only one who can say from any weapon they use, look, we have been using that and we know how it works in combat.
Israel is very secretive about its own arms exports and very successful at marketing its products. Like this battlefield tank simulator.
Now I managed to destroy the 2 tanks. Okay, you were asking about the ethical problem. Well, first, my simulator does not kill. Second, it's really the problem of those who buy it. I mean, they make the decision whether to buy it or not. And third, maybe if people will put their anger and their violence in this kind of simulator, maybe they'll give up real shooting and real killing.
But at least for now, people are buying real weapons. Next, we'll take you to the world of Sam Cummings, the world's biggest private arms dealer.
Most countries' political base is based on weapons. Chairman Mao is a much maligned individual in contemporary China, but he said one thing for then and now, and that was that politics grow out of the muzzle of a gun.
This is Sam Cummings, and this 57-year-old expatriate American walking the streets of Monte Carlo is the biggest private military weapons dealer in the world.
The business as a business is fascinating. The subject matter, to me, is my hobby.
Cummings has sold tens of millions of guns to armies and sportsmen, mostly war surplus.
Even today, when we get a shipment of old material into our British depot, I love to go up and put on an old suit and root through it just to find interesting items.
In 1961, Cummings decided to move to Monte Carlo. Coincidentally, Monte Carlo served as the home of the most notorious arms dealer of all time, Sir Basil Zaharoff. Sir Basil used the profits from selling to both sides in a wide range of wars to buy the company that ran Monte Carlo's famous casino. Dr. Edward Ezell says there's much in common between Zaharoff and Cummings. He should know. For 2 years, he worked for Cummings as a sales representative in the Far East.
As I say, I think there's a great deal of fantasy involved in what Sam does, both from people who observe him from the outside and from Sam's perspective as well. And, I mean, the fact that he lives in Monte Carlo, which was, you know, the old stomping ground of Basil Zaharoff.
You think that was deliberate?
Oh, yeah, it's just part of the whole image. And Sam has been, you know, really cultivated an image.
Cummings operates his worldwide empire out of a condominium overlooking Monte Carlo. Fittingly, it is called in French, the Armory. Every morning, Cummings uses a telex to keep in touch with his military customers and branch offices. A telex comes in from Sudan, offering surplus military equipment.
I would go about 25% more than that in dollars if my list is the same as your list.
Cummings' military weapons are shipped and stored at Inter Arms House in Manchester, England. At any given moment, there are 250,000 guns here. And on little notice, Cummings says he would have no trouble equipping a fair-sized army.
Depends how large the army would be, but let's say an army of an average smaller African or Latin American state is 25 to 50,000 men. No problem.
Cummings' estimated worth of several $100 million has not satisfied his urge to find the ultimate arms deal. In this case, equipping the Chinese army.
But we've been working in China for a little over 4 years now on the initial invitation of the Chinese People's Liberation Army to come out and visit them and take a look at what they had and give them some thoughts on modernization in the light and medium weapons field.
As a young arms buff, Cummings got his start at the CIA. His assignment was to buy surplus weapons in Europe. At the age of 23, he left the spy agency and started his own business.
So I started Inter Arms out of a post box with a Delaware corporation with a capital of $100, not paid in. I didn't have the $100 to pay it in. You could do that in Delaware in those days. P.O. box address, low overhead, and we were lucky. It's as simple as that.
Sam Cummings has sold or bought arms from almost every country in the world. Inter Arms has supplied Africa, and his company's weapons have shown up in Egypt. His guns were used at the Bay of Pigs by Fidel Castro, and in Nicaragua under Somoza. But Cummings' best customers are countries in Asia. Today, his weapons are being used by the Thai government to fend off communists. We asked Cummings about the morality of what he does, about how the weapons he sells are used.
Can I answer it in a sense by asking you a question? Are you responsible for killing people because your taxes are paid to your government, which uses the bulk of them for exactly the same type of work? Can I answer it by asking you another question? Here on my desk is a paper knife. It's quite capable of killing someone, but it's an inanimate object. Is it good or evil in itself? Does it have a character? I personally find that very difficult to believe.
Cummings says that being a private arms dealer is not easy when the same governments that regulate you are your biggest competitors.
The leading private arms dealers don't amount to a row of pins compared to what the governments do. By any statistical standard, money, numbers of units, whatever you want to pick, the governments, and by that I mean the major governments, but also minor governments are very active, must do at least 95% of the world's arms commerce, overtly and covertly.
Though Cummings complains about the role of governments in the arms business, some say he has profited because of favors he's done for intelligence agencies.
Sam has always skirted around what any kind of relationship he might have had with the CIA. And I don't know whether that is to hide the relationship or to leave it mysterious enough that each individual can draw his own conclusion.
Does Cummings use his mysterious image to help his business?
He knows very well that when he talks to the media, that's the best advertising in the world. Even if they portray him as, an evil soul, he can't lose.
007 James Bond is carrying the Walther PPK. Sam Cummings has a license to make the PPK in the United States. Free advertising like this Bond film helps market the PPK. That's important to Cummings because he's trying to get the U.S. Army to buy 500,000 of the handguns. But he faces more than a score of competitors. And Sam Cummings doesn't like competitors.
Well, when you want to be king, you don't want there to be, another king in the same country.
And Cummings has worked hard to eliminate his competition.
I try to look after them in the same way that I'm sure they try to look after me. And I suppose turnabout is fair play. And you're correct when you say the competition is essentially gone, and I can't shed any tear of remorse about that.
Cummings asked CNN to join him and his wife on the 8-hour drive from Monaco through the Italian Alps to the chalet in Dealr in the Swiss Alps. He asked us not to take pictures of his wife or his college-age daughters for security reasons. But despite threats to him and his family, he's philosophical about the dangers in the business.
I have, in a sense, a somewhat fatalistic attitude, because if there was one thing my CIA days taught me is that if they're going to get you, they will.
Though Cummings complains about the high taxes on his $1 million chalet in Dealr, he loves the lifestyle of the posh ski village. We joined him for a walk where he ran into an old friend.
So nice to see you.
Nice to see you too.
No?
When Cummings picks up his mail at the Dealr post office, it often includes confirmation of orders for Russian and Eastern Bloc weapons. Cummings says his buying of Soviet-made material is strictly business. They make a better product.
I would say the Russians build the best military weapons across the board, and they also build them in tremendous quantity, which is the key factor in modern war.
And Cummings warns that the Russian superiority in conventional weapons could have dire consequences for the West.
If in a conventional war, without any use of nuclear weapons, the Russians attacked Western Europe tomorrow, the Russians, in my opinion, would reach the channel in 72 hours and be over the channel one day later. I don't see how the Russians could be stopped without using nuclear weapons.
Cummings believes that if all the Western countries had the attitude of the Swiss toward conventional weapons, the threat from the Soviet Union could be met.
In a way, it's in miniature the same philosophy as the big powers use today, armed to the teeth in the hope that the other chap won't bother them.
Cummings likes to practice on this alpine range using the weapons that every Swiss male under 55 is required to qualify with twice a year.
The military arms business is based on human folly, and that is an extremely reliable element if you're in my business.
This is Inter Arms USA in Alexandria, Virginia. This is where Inter Arms and Sam Cummings first gained renown in the weapons business. But according to Cummings, the Inter Arms name is sometimes used in gun deals the company never made.
We had a high Hungarian official visit us last year in Manchester regarding certain business we have pending in Hungary. The Hungarian official, whom I'd never met until that visit, started our meeting by thanking me for the order I'd given him the year before for a quantity of Kalashnikovs through, in his words, your Austrian agent. I pointed out to the Hungarian official that, first of all, we have not ever had an Austrian agent.
And this is the man Cummings says made the deal using the Inter Arms name.
Do you know that man?
Yes. He was a former independent associate of ours. His name is Ernst Werner Glatt. He's a German citizen living in various spots in Europe and here in the United States.
But Glatt was more than a former associate. Cummings was the best man at Glatt's wedding. The Glatt and Cummings families were very close. Not anymore.
Well, in my personal view, he wouldn't steal a red hot stove.
Cummings says Glatt has gotten very wealthy very fast. Glott has a flat in this expensive section of London, 4 chalets in Villars, Switzerland, this townhouse in Alexandria, Virginia, and the heart of his real estate empire in the United States, the $10 million, 7,000-acre Black Eagle Farm near Charlottesville, Virginia. Glott, who agreed only to an off-camera interview, admits being wealthy, but claims he made his millions in the oil and meat business. He says that Cummings is out to ruin him because Cummings doesn't like seeing former employees succeeding as competitors.
But clearly this guy is really bothering
you. How can we really say that? I would not like to see him in the gun business.
In 1972, Glott stopped working for Cummings as a commission salesman because he says Cummings would not increase his commission on a $40 million deal with Somalia.
Total myth. Marvelous. I say marvelous if he'd done it. Where is the deal? Total myth.
CNN learned from CIA sources that Glott has been working with the Department of Defense since the early 1960s. According to those sources, Glott is assigned to provide East Bloc weapons to the U.S. government through Army intelligence. CNN learned that this man, Lieutenant Colonel Norman Blaylock, is Glott's contact at the Pentagon. After Army intelligence refused to discuss Glott, and Blaylock said he couldn't comment, we confronted the intelligence officer at his home.
I'm Joe Trento with Cable News Network. Good. We called, we followed your suggestion and called the PIO and had no luck.
Colonel Clark told you to refer your questions to him. Please do that.
No, he did not tell me that.
Please do that.
He said he couldn't comment.
Please do that.
Do you know Mr. Glott?
Would you like to have Colonel...
I'd love it, but do you
got it.
Do you know Mr. Glott? Sir, are you Mr. Glott's control officer?
I do believe that if he's working in the gun business with the government for the supply of East Bloc material, that's the only place that he could work. I do believe that, in my personal view, the government is playing the role of a fool.
But if Cummings has stories to tell about his former employees, a former employee has some things to say about Cummings. As we said earlier, Dr. Edward Ezell worked for Cummings at one time. When we first interviewed him at his office in the Smithsonian Institution in Washington, he freely commented about Cummings, although he never mentioned he had worked for him. When we again talked with Ezell, Cummings suggested that we ask him about his interarm supervisor in Singapore, Brian Borthwick.
I'm surprised that Sam would bring that up. Brian was accused in the fall of 1973 of having been involved in a plot to assassinate Marcos.
Of the Philippines.
Of the President Marcos of the Philippines. And Brian, I think, was involved in the plot.
Did Sam know about his involvement in the plot?
My opinion is yes. And you'll have to ask Sam for the details on that.
Cummings said that he had no prior knowledge of the plot, but both he and Ezell agree the method of assassination was bizarre.
As I remember from what Brian told me afterwards and what I read in the press afterwards about it, he was to fill a model airplane with high explosives and radio guided, which, you know, you can easily do with model airplanes, over, I believe, Marcos's palace. And Marcos, the Philippines, the climate is very agreeable, and they have a lot of outdoor receptions. And as Marcos was lifting a toast to victory, the airplane would zoom in, and that would be the final victory, so to speak.
When we return, we'll take you to the Persian Gulf War with a mysterious arms dealer who supplies Iraq. For the rest of the world, the Iran-Iraq war conjures up fear of oil shortages. But for Iran and Iraq, this is just another battle in the war started when Iraq was Babylon and Iran was Persia. The million who have perished in this war are the latest dead in a conflict spanning centuries, and many of those that survive are marked for life. "3,000 miles from the Iran-Iraq battlefront is the scenic elegance of Geneva, Switzerland, a suite in the luxurious Hotel Rhone, its occupant, Sarkis Soghanalian, the Middle East's largest private arms dealer. His biggest client, Iraq. He's preparing for one of his frequent trips to Baghdad. When we arrived, Soghanalian was complaining about an article in the French press, saying Iraq was losing a key battle.
Yeah, but it's lie because I was on the phone with the headquarters in Baghdad. And
the faith that the Iraqi regime has in Soghanalian is so strong that other arms merchants have to go through him before they can even get in the country to make a sales pitch.
Well, you have a reputation that counts. The secret is that in this business is keep your mouth shut, put your deal together, and get out of the way.
As a boy, Soghanalian fought in the French underground. He's a citizen of Lebanon, where he gained an important reputation in the arms business by providing massive amounts of aid to the Christian Phalangists. At the CIA's request, Soghanalian has supplied anti-Sandinista guerrillas in Nicaragua. His relationship with U.S. intelligence has spanned many years.
What kind of equipment? Yeah, what type of aircraft?
Soghanalian travels in luxurious style, from his suites in the most lavish hotels in Europe to his luxurious intercontinental 727 jet named for his granddaughter, Nicole. He says it's strictly business.
With the stress that you have and the mileage that you put in your life, you need that comfort. You have to show that you're not cheap SOB running in the street and you're running after somebody's buck.
Sarkis orders a midnight takeoff for Baghdad from Geneva Airport. Aboard are businessmen trying to consummate a uniform deal with the Iraqi military. They include this man, Jack Brennan, former military aide to Richard Nixon. Brennan tells CNN that he represents Spiro Agnew and John Mitchell in a deal for several $100 million in uniforms for the Iraqi army. As the passengers slept, a nervous aircrew approached the Iraqi capital Baghdad in early morning. Fear of an Iranian attack on incoming airliners normally limits Baghdad plane traffic to darkness. But Soghanalian does not always play by the rules. Unknown to the crew, Iranian jets had crossed into Iraqi airspace and begun to trail the airliner. Baghdad Tower ordered the 727 to expedite its landing.
Kind of makes you wonder what's going on, you know?
After a safe landing, Iraqi officials claim that 2 Iranian jets pursuing the airliner had been intercepted and shot down. To a first-time visitor, the bustling streets of Baghdad give little hint of a country at war. Five times a day, the mosques throughout the city come to life with a call to prayer. For the average Iraqi, there's much to pray for these days, as government-controlled television brings almost a continuous flow of war news, with gory pictures from the front of Iranian war dead.
Our forces hit the enemy units in east of Basra, killing and wounding great numbers of enemy troops and destroying some weapons and equipment.
Soghanalian's brought to Taji, a secret military base north of Baghdad. Here the Iraqi military asked Sarkis to inspect captured and damaged Iranian weapons. Sarkis showed us the wreckage of a U.S.-built Iranian fighter plane.
Well, this is an F-14 shut down during the early part of the war.
How much money are we seeing in these 2 junk barrels?
10 million apiece. Each case makes 1 aircraft $20 million.
But basically, the $20 million has been reduced to a hunk of junk.
That's right. That's where your taxpayers' money is.
The Iraqis asked Soghanalian to look at these captured Iranian tanks, many of them American, for possible salvage value.
This tank is brand new tank.
It looks like it.
I'll tell you why, because you see, when you have a casting on a rubber, you have certain you know, the mold cracks that.
So it's still there?
Should. It's still there. This tank, I don't think this tank has more than 400 or 500 miles.
It looks like it was just captured.
It was captured. The driver of this tank just left it and walked away.
So if you could refurbish this tank,
yeah,
what would it sell for? Is there a market for it at all?
I would say $2 million, $2.5 million. If you don't have good army, good armored force, therefore you don't have good politics.
Okay, what vehicle are we looking at here? What is this?
This is similar to the previous one that we have seen. It's very valuable equipment this year, and it's classified. It's not supposed to be exported without license, State Department license or anything of that sort. But unfortunately, it's here.
Would you trust your life in one of these tanks if you had to fight?
No, I wouldn't. Because you have to realize one thing. The tank is always a big target in the field. Everybody goes on a tank. Some soldiers do think that the tank is armored and they have a better defense than any other vehicle. For instance, myself, if I would travel, I would be safer in a Jeep than I would be in a tank, because nobody will pay any attention to a Jeep.
This is where the war is, Qurna, Iraq, home of the legendary Garden of Eden. Qurna is a dusty town where the Tigris and Euphrates rivers converge into the Shat al-Arab waterway. That waterway has been the key issue between Iraq and Iran going back to ancient times. 10 miles east of here, tens of thousands of Iranians and Iraqis have fought to the death as Iran failed in attempts to capture Qurna and cut Baghdad off from Iraq's seaport, Basra. Partial testimony to the effectiveness of Soghanalian's weapons are the dead Iranians on the battlefield and the thousands of prisoners of war in camps throughout Iraq. Soghanalian says while Iran has twice the population to fight the war, Iraq is winning with better training and equipment.
Are you happy with the army you've helped put together here?
Oh, yeah, very much so. There's no comparison, but you see, again, you're fighting different type of war here. It's unexperienced enemy against iron fist.
We are aboard a reconnaissance helicopter that can target artillery and is used for intelligence missions. It is typical of the equipment Sarkis says he supplies to the Iraqis at little profit.
I don't take money into consideration at all. In some other areas, I do. But over here, the quantity is big, and the people are our friends. This is the type of relationship we have. Therefore, we don't talk about making money or not making money. On the other hand, when the time is right, you ask them any favor you want, I'm sure they will do you the favor.
Most of this equipment is supplied by Soghanalian through Eastern Bloc countries. We could see in the distance U.S.-built Iranian helicopter gunships supplied to Iran during the Shah's regime, attacking the Iraqi troops. And these are Iranian POWs, who just minutes before these pictures were taken, were probably wounded by weapons Soghanalian supplied.
When I sell the weapons, I look at it, if it's serving the purpose for peace, for self-defense, and I'll sell it. Some people call us armed dealer. Some people call us arms smuggler. Some people call whatever they want to call. But remember one thing, that State Department himself, the Army, Pentagon himself, your own government himself is an armed dealer. So therefore, we're not alone in the field. Therefore, we do not feel guilty.
Sarkis Soghanalian says that while he and the Soviet Union are Iraq's main sources of weapons, Iraq's enemy, Iran, is getting military support from an unexpected source, Israel. Somehow, the Iranian Air Force, despite the U.S. embargo, has been kept flying. They don't have many planes left, but they are getting the parts so they can fly.
Yeah.
Who is supplying these parts?
Well, it's very clear, and only people that do have that technology that will have those birds flying in the air is Israel.
The U.S. has banned all arms sales to the Khomeini government and asked its allies to do the same. But CNN has learned that the United States looks the other way when it comes to Israel supplying Iran. Soghanalian says that you can't lay all the blame on Israel.
But again, you know, you turn around, you find out they have full support of the USA.
But arms dealer Sam Cummings says Israel has its own justification for secretly supplying arms to Iran.
Well, the enemy of my enemy is my friend. And the Israelis are probably the world's most pragmatic people. They're very cohesive, very capable, and if they see a war going on between Iran and Iraq, Iran is no friend of Israel, but Iraq is even less of a friend of Israel.
The Israeli government rejected repeated requests to provide a spokesman for this broadcast. Instead, the Israeli embassy in Washington issued this statement. The State of Israel does not provide details regarding or refer in any manner to its weapons sales. While the Israelis and Sarkis Soghanalian are reaping profits from the Persian Gulf War, at least one arms supplier found a less pleasant fate. British arms merchant John Longstaff, a supplier to Iraq, married, father of two, ended up dead.
We commend our brother, John, to your perfect mercy and wisdom.
In March, the 36-year-old Longstaff boarded a British Airways flight from Frankfurt to London.
Mrs. Sarah Soghanalian, please contact airport information around 4. Miss Sarah.
He was returning from an arms show. British authorities were expecting to question Longstaff about thefts at government weapons depots throughout England. Police found Longstaff's body with his throat slashed in a locked restroom. A double-edged razor blade rested on the dead man's clothing. Police say that Longstaff committed suicide, but his 30-year-old widow, Linda, doesn't believe it.
Obviously, I believe that John was murdered, so he must have been involved with some government and a deal very, very deeply.
Linda Longstaff says the British government is hiding what her husband was involved in.
I know John was approached by them in 1978, but whether or not he was still working for them, I do not know. Well, I always had a fear, because of the state of the world, that we were in a dangerous business. But, I don't know, you just marry somebody and accept what they do. I realise now that the rules of the game are like the old saying, if you live by the sword, you die by the sword.
CNN has learned from government sources in Iraq that Longstaff had acted as a middleman in the sale of chemicals to the Iraqi government. These sources say the chemicals were used in a variety of weapon systems. What Iraqi officials will not say is if Longstaff provided the materials used in chemical weapons against Iran. During this program, we've seen how the weapons of war are used. We saw arms merchant Sarkis Soghanalian at the Iraq-Iran war, watching the carnage his weapons wrought. We have seen how the superpowers dominate the trillion-dollar-a-year arms market. And we've seen how the third world has entered the arms race. But the business keeps coming in. And arms dealer Sam Cummings says that is the nature of man.
I'm convinced that in the broadest sense, the military arms business is based on human folly, and that is an extremely reliable element if you're in my business.
Joe Trento, CNN, on special assignment.